saying I do appreciate that you're spending some time with us today to discuss managed services. I'm hoping that today I'm going to be able to provide some additional insights into how we think about managed services and mindset, and particularly in the way that they can provide value and increased flexibility for your organization and reduce risk, especially in a scenario in times that are pretty uncertain. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I'm going to go through a few things here today, and then I'm really looking forward to some Q&A at the end of the conversation as well. Really quick running through our agenda today, what I'd like to walk through. First of all, I'll give a little bit more of an introduction of myself and an introduction of mindset, so you have a concept and some context of who we are and what we do. I'll provide a foundational overview of managed services so that at least we can be working from a common definition. There are people who have a lot of different views of what managed services may or may not be. I'll talk a little bit about why I believe and why we are seeing managed services being particularly relevant, some of the external factors and global factors that are impacting that assessment, and then tie back together specifically how managed services as a process and as an engagement are well suited to address some of those challenges. Lastly, I'll talk a little bit about Mindset's approach to managed services, what we do and how we do managed services at Mindset, and some of our specific services in that area, and then finish up with Q&A. Hopefully we'll get a good discussion going throughout the conversation so that we can have a good Q&A at the end of the conversation as well. So as Amy alluded to, a little bit more about me. I've been with Mindset for about 4 years, and I do oversee both sales and customer experience at Mindset. I own our managed services offering, and as Amy alluded to, I spent a lot of time in big IT in the Twin Cities. I bought a lot of managed services. I've leveraged managed services throughout my tenure at those companies. And to be frank with you, I've had some good experiences with managed services, and I've had some not so good experiences with managed services, as I'm sure many folks on the call today have. But what I've worked to do and what we work to do at Mindset is to take those experiences that we've had, both the good and the bad, to articulate an offering and articulate an approach that is really good and provides a really great experience for our customers as we engage with them. A little bit more about me personally. I live here in Minneapolis. I live in a suburb of Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm married with two elementary school age kids. I got a puppy earlier this spring. It was not technically a COVID puppy, but has definitely provided a lot of extra excitement as we've gone through this time over the course of the past 8 months or so. I'm passionate about spending time with my family. We're a baseball family, so in a normal summer, you would find us out at the baseball fields pretty much every single day. Very involved in that. Both of my kids play Little League, and that's a ton of fun. And then I also love playing golf, and this summer provided us an opportunity. Actually, since we didn't have quite as much baseball, we provided us an opportunity to combine that family element with golf, and I got my kids in particular out to play a little bit more golf. So. Not terribly good at it, but enjoy it nonetheless. So, that's a little bit more about me and who I am and where I'm coming from. I'd like to just give you a little bit of context of who Mindset is. I'm not going to spend a ton of time. Some of you may be familiar with us, some of you may not be, but we are a technology partner, an SAP Silver partner based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota in the United States. And our vision and our focus is really on providing an exceptional user experience within the SAP platform and within enterprise software. So as you look at what our mission is, committed to making the technology experience significantly better at work for everyone, that's really where we drive what we focus on as an organization. We've seen a lot of advances in the consumer experience, in the experience for consumer grade applications. And we unfortunately have not seen traditionally as much advancement in the enterprise software area as we would like in parallel with that. And that's something that we really strive to achieve. We take a human-centered design approach for all of our engagements. We focus on user experience for everything that we do. And everything that we do is related to SAP. Today's conversation is not necessarily SAP centric, although a lot of the examples that I give and a lot of the experiences that we provide are going to be in the SAP space. A little bit more specifics about our practice. And again, providing an incredible experience across your entire SAP landscape, regardless of where you are in your SAP journey. Whether you're starting at the beginning, articulating a strategy or reinventing a strategy for how to get the most out of your SAP implementation. Or if you're looking to identify the best way to design and implement the next portion of your SAP landscape that's going to unlock additional value for your business. And again, doing that with a user focus and a user experience focus. Or lastly, what we're talking about today, identifying the best way to manage your existing investment and ensure that your existing investment, you're getting the most out of your existing investment through managed services. Last but certainly not least, we do have out-of-the-box software products as well that we'd love to talk to you about. We have an application called Fiori App Analyzer, which if you have implemented or are planning on implementing Fiori applications in your landscape, this allows you to gain great user insights, understand utilization trends, things like that for your existing Fiori application investments, so you know where to invest next. And then we have applications in the transportation management space around our driver application and safe transport application. And lastly, not on here, but something that we're working really hard on right now is a product called Warehouse Wise, which is going to drastically improve the user experience in your supply chain like EWM type areas. We are a member of the SAP App House network. We are the only partner at SAP App House in the United States, something that we're really proud of. If you're not familiar with the App House, this is a physical manifestation of SAP's drive to do human-centered design thinking-led engagements, and correlates perfectly to the way that we execute projects with our customers. What you're seeing on the screen here is our office in downtown Minneapolis, which we purpose-built as an app house, moved in February, spent about 4 or 5 weeks there, and haven't been back since. So we are maybe in the minority. We're a company of people that are actually really excited to have the opportunity to go back into our office because we got just a taste of our brand new amazing office space, and then have been working from home ever since. But if you're in the Minneapolis area, talk to us about leveraging our app house. We'd love to have you in. Even if you're not in Minneapolis, talk to us. We'll figure something out. We'll fly in or figure something out. We think it's a great experience. We think it's really important to get out of your normal situation in order to really unlock the creative approach that we want to have with our customers as we're looking to solve their problems. So that's enough about us for now. I'll jump into the primary content that we're going to talk about today and really start off with getting everybody level set and on the same page about what managed services are. I pulled this definition, as you see, from Wikipedia. It's a little bit wordy. The practice of outsourcing responsibility for maintaining, anticipating the need for a range of processes and functions in order to improve operations and cut expenses. So while I think that's an okay definition, it's also obviously a little bit wordy. So from my perspective, what it really comes down to, what managed services really come down to, are allowing somebody else to focus on solving a problem for you that you are not particularly invested in solving yourself, or you don't have, your business is not to solve the problem that is being addressed with managed services. And as I get into the next slide where we talk about some examples of managed services, I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that. I think it's pretty straightforward, but want to make sure that we're basically all on the same page. What most people probably think about when they think about managed services is some element of support services, and it's very common, potentially the most common type of managed services, and that's providing break-fix services for your production environments or your entire landscape. It doesn't have to be just production environments. But this is where you've gone through the effort and you've executed a project to implement net new functionality within your organization. You roll it out to your end users, and then you need to support it. You need to make sure that that it's scalable, that it's stable, that it's running, that it's meeting the user's needs from an availability perspective. And as you maintain focus on moving on to the next thing that you want to drive great business value around for your customers, you can typically get a lot of value by having another provider come in and do that support, because it's less complex potentially, and not as differentiating for what you want to have your core team spending their time on. Similarly, network management is another good example of a managed service. If you're in the business of building applications, or if you're in the business of delivering value through software, that software is likely going to have to run on a network, but it's also likely that you're not going to want to worry about how that network is working. So handing that management over to another provider is usually a good idea in terms of how you can make sure that you're continuing to invest in the places that make the most sense for you in your organizational focus. And the last one I'll talk about here as an example, again, there are many other examples, is application development. And I'm going to talk about this a couple of times throughout the conversation today, because it's something that I think is particularly compelling and not necessarily utilized as often as some of the others. But this is the situation which we would create a long-running build team or a product team that consumes an evolving backlog of work to create functionality over time. The nuance here is that you are not doing an application development project. You are creating a team, and you are creating a capacity to deliver functionality within that context. And again, I'll talk a little bit more in some specific examples later, but there's a lot of advantages that this can provide in a lot of situations, and something that we've seen be really successful with some of our customers. It adds a lot of efficiency in the right situation. It does some of the things that I'll talk about later in terms of flexibility and scalability. And I think is a really good and potentially underutilized option for a managed services type of an engagement. I think I'll pause here really quick, and we're going to have some polls that are going to happen today. That is hopefully going to provide us an opportunity to be a little bit more interactive. And the first poll that I'm going to launch, which you should see coming up right now, is how you or your company are using managed services within your landscape. And we talk about an SAP landscape there specifically because we focus on SAP. But obviously, if you're not leveraging SAP yourself, just talk about this in the context of your particular landscape. So I'll leave that poll out there for just a minute, and hopefully we'll get some responses there coming through from that. And if you have other ways in which you may be using managed services, or you're considering managed services that aren't out there on the poll, you can drop some of that stuff in the chat, and that's potentially an option for us to discuss as part of the Q&A at the end of the conversation. So what I'm seeing as the poll results come in, and I'll let it go for just a couple more seconds, not really that surprising. A lot of folks who are leveraging managed services for support, a lot of support coupled with enhancements. At least somebody out there that's using product team managed services, which is exciting, and innovation too, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, is also coming up on that poll as well. So it seems like there's a lot, and a couple folks that are not using managed services at all, which is maybe a little bit surprising. I feel like this is a very common way for people to use services. So I'm gonna end that poll, and I'll actually share the results. But support coupled with small enhancements is the winner, and not surprising to me, right? I think that's probably the most common place that people leverage managed services. So let me move on. Thank you for that information, for sharing there. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about why now is an interesting time to talk about managed services, and then again I'll tie back in why specifically managed services I think are unique or are relevant. The word that I've sort of chosen here is uncertainty. Even in the best of times, uncertainty is going to be part of an organization's decision-making process. Nothing, very little is certain. But today, and what we see now, I think uncertainty is at a particularly high point. And actually the piece of relevant evidence that I found for that from the National Bureau of Economic Research, in which they did a study and they use a particular set of criteria to rank the relative level of uncertainty that exists in our economic and social systems today. What they've called out here, which is not terribly surprising, is that the current pandemic has created an amount of uncertainty shock that is greater than what we saw 10 years ago in the financial crisis, and on par with what we saw in the Great Depression in the 20s and 30s. Which I think is pretty telling and pretty compelling also in terms of what organizations are facing today as they're looking to make decisions. Where I think uncertainty has impact then, as I'm sure you've experienced yourselves, is it hampers your ability to make decisions, or it challenges your ability to make decisions. And this decision-making problem can have implications on both sides. So you may make a decision to invest someplace, and then because of that uncertainty, the investment didn't materialize, and that results in a financial impact to your organization, potential layoffs, things like that. On the flip side, because of that uncertainty, you may choose not to invest. You may choose to not take advantage of an opportunity that presents itself because you just don't have the level of certainty that you're comfortable with. And that results very frequently in missed opportunities and not being able to take advantage of a situation that may have been positive for you or your organization. And I'll chat about this a little bit later, but there are some elements of managed services that I think mitigate the impact of uncertainty as you're looking at its effect on the decision-making process within an organization. The other thing that I think is particularly impactful in terms of some of the things that we're seeing today, and a lot of what I'm referring to here is related to the pandemic and the economic uncertainty associated with it, but it's not exclusive to it. And that's really around rapidly changing demand. So we have seen, I think, over the course of the past year, some really interesting overnight almost changes in the demand or consumer behavior or individual behavior. That has forced technologies to pivot and react at a speed that is not typical, I would say, that is much more accelerated than what you would normally see. An example of this that I thought, and this is a personal example from somebody who I know who works in this industry here in Minneapolis. But what we saw, obviously, if we kind of walk through this example, with the restrictions that have been put on public gatherings and in the interest of overall public health, that has caused consumers to look for other options with their recreational time. And a lot of that has been driven to, looking inward, doing more family-centric activities. So things like camping have been very, very popular over the course of the past year. Golf is another example of this. But in the camping scenario, there was an increase in this particular example that I'm talking about with the person I was talking to. He works for an RV company, a company here in Minneapolis that manufactures and sells recreational vehicles. So the demand, as families were looking to go out and do more camping and do more family-centric activities, demand for RVs went through the roof. The challenge, of course, so that company wants to take advantage of that option, right? The challenge, of course, being that those same restrictions that were being applied to public gatherings obviously applied to the workplace as well, and impacted the supply chain. So not only was the demand through the roof for these types of vehicles, but their capacity to create and deliver on that demand was actually diminished. So this is a situation in which you have, within the span of a month or two, you have a situation in which you have to react very quickly. Now, I'm not here to tell you that managed services are some sort of silver bullet, right? They are not going to be able to solve everything. and in a particular situation like this, they could have an impact, but they're not going to be able to get people back to work. But as I'll show you, I hope you'll see that managed services can mitigate some of the impact of some of these other things that we're seeing in these scenarios. So then let's talk a little bit about the specific elements of managed services that I think can mitigate or help against some of these things. And the first thing that I'll talk about a little bit is mitigating against uncertain resource availability. As I talked about before, predicting demand for resources is always challenging. Keeping resources engaged in meaningful work, avoiding the need to go through reductions in force if you do have an impact to your business. Those things are not only important for your company's productivity, but also for maintaining a company culture and a morale that allows your resources to maintain passion and engagement with what they're doing. What managed services, the role that managed services can play here is they allow you to complement or augment an existing team in places where you may not be as certain in the investment that you're looking to make. So an example from our standpoint, we have a particular customer who has an element of their delivery, an element of their business that doesn't have enough work to justify a full team of resources. So what we have worked with them to do is build a limited capacity team or a limited capacity set of resources who can work through a backlog or work through a set of work at a pace that's a little bit slower and isn't necessarily as demanding as what they might need for a full-time resource. What this allows them to do, of course, is continue to make progress on the work that they need to get done. It also allows them to avoid a situation in which they have to hire someone who may not be fully utilized, or if demand changes unexpectedly, may need to be let go in the future. And a lot of times you can also use contract resources to do that, but in situations where you might not even have enough for a full-time resource over a period of time or for a long enough contract, that also provides some difficulty, and which is where managed services can provide a lot of value. On our side, from the supplier side, we're likely delivering managed services in a place where we have demand coming from multiple different locations. So we don't have necessarily much of a problem with partial allocation of resources on a particular engagement. So it works out for us just fine because we can take those resources in our particular area of subject matter expertise and apply them elsewhere. So it really provides a really nice dynamic that works for both things and results in a situation that's very productive. Similarly, managed services can improve your company's ability to scale. And a lot of this comes from, or can be related back to the earlier cause that I had around needing to rapidly change capacity to meet different demands that you may not have been able to anticipate. When you're in a managed services agreement, you're likely contracted with an organization that has capacity beyond what you are utilizing yourself. So if you're working with Mindset on an SAP managed services engagement, you can understand that we have resources above and beyond what you have working on your project at any point in time. So if you have a situation in which suddenly you need to scale up the ability for that team to do work, we are able to more quickly provide resources to manage that scale than what you might be able to accomplish yourself. You don't have to go through a hiring process and a process of defining the specific requirements. You can simply leverage the existing engagement that you have with a customer, or that you're establishing with a new supplier, to add more resources, add more capacity, add more scale. On the flip side, sometimes you have to scale down, and this can provide a similar level of flexibility and a similar level of benefit, where if you have less demand in a place than what you had anticipated, you can reduce the team, and you can reduce your cost associated with that area, and you can do it in a way that doesn't require you to team existing employees or resources around your organization. You can do it in a way that doesn't require you to roll off resources. An example that I have here is we talked about those application build teams before. We actually have an application build team that has multiple individual teams associated with it at one of our customers. And that application build team serves multiple different business organizations within that particular customer. And the demand coming from each of those business organizations fluctuates. So, over one quarter, it may be that the finance organization is needing the most help and needing the most work to be done. And we're able to allocate those resources to the finance organization. And then simultaneously, we may have a situation in which the supply chain organization also needs help. And they need help in an area that's similar to what we're providing for finance. And in this case, in particular, it's around Fiori development. Well, we can pull from our existing backlog of resources, our resources, and add additional capacity within that organization to simultaneously be able to help both finance and supply chain meet their goals. Whereas if the organization was required to do that themselves, it would be very difficult for them to scale up and add those resources. And they didn't necessarily have demand that would last in a particular area for years on end. So then after the work is done for supply chain, for example, we can scale that team back down to more of the typical run rate. So again, it provides a lot of ability to scale. It mitigates against the investment risk that you might have as you're looking to increase capacity in a particular area. This is similar to the example that I just gave, but maybe to provide a little bit more detail on it. It also allows you to adjust capacity and different capabilities. So in the example that I gave earlier, we were talking about scaling up within a development team that could service multiple business units. What you also might have, though, is a situation in which you need to increase capacity for a capability that you didn't have or only had a very little bit of before. So if you needed suddenly, again, using supply chain as an example, if you needed to quickly ramp up your supply chain group, if you're running supply chain software within SAP, you could come to Mindset or come to a managed services provider and say, hey, you guys are doing a great job within the finance area, but I've suddenly got a bunch of demand within supply chain. And what that allows us to do is we can pull in from our talent, our subject matter expertise. We can build out that team that you need in order to adjust the capacity to align to the demand that you have in the supply chain area. And then, and we can do it very quickly. We can do it far more quickly than what you might be able to do as an individual organization. And again, with less risk on you as an organization as well. So again, this is all about different ways in which the flexibility of a managed services engagement can provide mitigation against risk and mitigation against the amount of investment that you need to do there. Finally, and this was, it's interesting that this came up in the poll. This is one that I really enjoy, which is using managed services to do innovation and do proofs of concept. Again, those are very frequently an area in which you don't necessarily have as clear of a return on investment, especially early on. That's essentially what you're doing, is you're trying to prove out a potential return on investment. And what this allows you to do is quickly scale up a team. Maybe it's a week, maybe it's a month, to prove out that concept or disprove that concept and understand whether or not additional investment is required for you as an organization to take that concept through. The other thing that that I like about this, and when we do these types of managed services engagement as a Mindset organization, is we can actually bring to the conversation expertise not only around the particular subject matter area that you were doing the proof of concept within, but also about doing proofs of concept themselves and about doing innovation themselves. That's something that we do a lot of at Mindset, is a lot of innovation, a lot of proofs of concept. So we can bring that capability and that practice to the table as we do, as you look for us to execute proofs of concept on behalf of your organization. It's really compelling and not necessarily a place where I think most people think of managed services providing a different type of value than what you might see out of a traditional managed services provider, which is going to be focused on support. So before I move on into some things about mindset managed services, and I hope this information provided at least a little bit of insight and a little bit of a different way of thinking about where managed services can provide you value individually. The next poll I'll put out there is asking here. I'll launch it here. What is the most important element that you would want to consider when choosing a managed services provider? What are the things that are important to you when you're looking to have somebody take over holistically a process area or a particular area of delivery within your organization? Price is very frequently the thing that gets talked about the most. It's easy to see on a contract, but I'm really interested to see what else is interesting. What else do you think about? I actually read an article just this last week as I was preparing for this, in which the article was articulating that service level agreements, which are a very typical portion of managed services engagements, should include user experience elements as part of the service level to which the supplier is accountable to. And I really thought that was interesting, because most of the time is it the right cost? Are you going to turn it around in the right amount of time? What is your success rate? Those sorts of things. And to put user experience as part of that, I thought was really interesting. So what I'm seeing in the poll here is I think that the majority is coming in at the strategic alignment of vision, which makes sense. I think when we look at turning over the capability to another provider, to a third party, and having them manage that themselves, making sure that they understand what you are looking to accomplish as an organization and how that service itself contributes to the execution of that vision is really important. Thank you. I appreciate the feedback on the poll. So where I'm going to go next, I'm going to talk a little bit about, I've alluded to some of this a little bit, but I'll talk in a little bit more specificity. I won't go too long, but I'll talk a little bit about our approach at Mindset to managed services. The primary message that I want to deliver here around what we do is that it's our managed services engagements and our managed services approach are a direct extension of what we believe in as a company and what our vision is as a company, and that ties all the way back to providing a remarkable experience for our customers. So our managed services are really still about building partnerships and building an engagement model with our customers that really exceed their expectations. Specifically, some examples of where we do that and how we do that are strategic services, build teams, centers of excellence or expertise, and support and maintenance. So I'll briefly go through a few of those as we and talk through those in a little bit more detail. Strategic services, as I mentioned before, when you're looking to drive the vision and the long-term plan for your SAP digital transformation or your SAP implementation, strategic services are going to be a key part of that. And what we all, I think, know to be true is that you can't plot a journey, you can't plan it out once and just go execute, right? This is an iterative process, it's an ongoing process. And that's where we can provide a strategic services in the form of a managed service over a long period of time, where you have access to resources on demand, but don't necessarily have dedicated resources on site all day, every day, if that's not what you need. But can still have access to that expertise that's going to help you derive a vision that makes sense, that aligns to what you're trying to accomplish as an organization, and that takes advantage of the most compelling capabilities that exist within SAP. A lot of companies doing this, of course, as they're looking for their path with S/4HANA. This is a big part of what we're doing right now with a lot of our customers is building that path, building that journey from what they have now into S4. Talked about this a lot already. This is probably one of the places where we have the most extensive engagements in our managed services, and really is a build upon where Mindset made a lot of our really establish our brand and our capabilities over the course of the past 4 or 5 years. And that's around creating innovation and delivery in a design factory with an organization, and ultimately resulting in teams, product build teams that are able to gain a lot of efficiency and build a lot of value for an organization. What we've seen over and over again in all of our engagements is that if you can establish a team and keep a team together as they're working through development or as they're working through a backlog, the efficiency of that team and the way in which that team becomes a core part of our customers' organizations increases over that period of time. So if you're able to build a situation, if you're able to establish a situation in which that team can be on site for a long period of time, you're going to see a drastic improvement in efficiency over the period of that engagement. So something that I really believe heavily in, and that we've seen a lot of really positive results with some of our customers. A lot of times we'll start off with a project and then migrate to a build team after we've established the baseline or the foundation with a particular customer. Alluded to this earlier as well, but building out centers of excellence. And a lot of times what we've seen here with our customers is establishing a seed group of resources. And what I mean by that is if you're implementing a new capability within your SAP landscape, let's say transportation management, we can provide a set of resources at the beginning of that engagement who ultimately become the subject matter experts to begin with, but part of their goal is to help establish that subject matter expertise within your organization, but decrease the ramp up time that it takes for your organization to become proficient within that particular area, right? So you may have 2 or 3 or 4 people who you need to be the transportation management subject matter experts within the next 4 or 5 years. You already have those people in your organization, so you don't need to go hire people, but they're not there yet. They don't have that understanding yet. Well, if you complement them with a team of people who have done this before and who have that expertise already, it's going to drastically accelerate their ability to become proficient in that area and ultimately allow you to build a team that's more efficient and effective in a shorter amount of time than what you might have been able to do otherwise. And last but not least, of course, we do have to talk about support services as part of managed services, because this is a very common and potentially the most common place that we see managed services, excuse me. You know, the twist for us, or the differentiation for us, is it's not just about break fix. It's still about providing the best experience possible within the investment that you already have as an organization within SAP or your ERP. And where we see this most commonly is building an enhancement capability into the support agreement. So as an example, we had a customer with whom we deployed, I think, a set of about 4 or 5 applications, mobile applications, over a period of 3 or 4 projects. And what we did at the end of each of those projects, or as we deployed those projects to production, is we deployed a team that was simultaneously accountable for making sure that the production version of those applications continued to perform the way that we would expect them to, that they were available and performing, meeting performance requirements and doing all those sorts of things. But we also allowed that team, and because that team was part of the development team that deployed those applications initially, to continue to make enhancements. So as we got feedback, again, end user feedback is so important to us, and that doesn't stop when you go live. And as we got feedback from those end users after the application was in production, it allowed us to respond to that feedback, provide additional enhancements to the application, and make it even better for those ultimate end users. So it was a great mix of being able to provide expertise in a place that the customer didn't have around being able to support that set of applications, while also continuing the innovation and continuing the value delivery that was associated with the application to begin with. So I think a really compelling story around how we can do, again, more than quote unquote just break fix or just what you would consider as sort of typical support. So that's the that is the content that I wanted to share today. We're about 40 minutes into the hour, so I think we do have some good time for Q&A. So maybe I'll throw it over to Amy, who I think has been managing the chat and managing the Q&A, to see what we've seen come through from a Q&A perspective and increase the dialogue a little bit based upon what the audience wants to hear about.
Yep. Thank you, Luke. Great presentation. We do have several questions. The first one is, in your experience, what is the best or optimal costing model for managed services, taking into account, for example, the ability to scale up, down as customer requirements change?
That's a really good question. I don't know that I have a best or optimal, because my perspective on managed services, as I think you've seen a little bit today, is the specific managed services engagement is going to depend upon what the customer needs and what the particular need of a customer is in a situation. What I've seen work a lot of the time is something that, or what I guess I would strive for, is a model that the customer and the supplier can align upon that reflects the specific thing that they're looking to accomplish with that service. So, for example, going back to that build team example, the thing that is most important for a product build team ultimately is the value and the capabilities that are delivered by that build team. So in some of our situations, we actually we're not charging based upon the time and materials. We're not charging based upon the number of hours that are worked by our team to deliver that. We're actually being charged or we're being paid based upon the amount of value and the amount of capability that we deliver. So we measure the value that we deliver as part of that application build team, and that's what our customer is paying for. So again, it drives a really good alignment to say, for the customer to say, I don't care how much you work, I care about getting value. I care about getting new features and functionality. I care about what my end users are going to receive. And therefore, we as a company are incentivized to create a service or create a team that gives them as much value as possible. In other situations, in a more typical support example, that cost structure is likely going to be aligned to things like uptime and response time, and hopefully aligned to what I talked about a little before, aligned to also ongoing enhancements and improvements to the capability. So, I think there are a lot of different ways that work. I guess if I were to, again, answer the question a little bit more distinctly, it's just whatever does the best job of aligning the value output from the supplier to what the customer's goals ultimately are.
Perfect. Great, thank you for that. Next question. What have you heard from your customers regarding the most important things they're getting from their managed services providers that increase value beyond the ROI spelled out in the service contract?
That's a good question. So what I hear a lot is, and some of this, frankly, would come also from my own experience, is a frustration around trying to execute to the bare minimum of what is outlined in a contract. So as an example, if you have a service level agreement that says I have to respond within 4 hours or whatever those types of service level agreements might be, all you're really talking about, or the only thing that the supplier and the customer are discussing, are whether or not the service level agreements have been met. Whereas where I think there's opportunity for value, and where I think that there's opportunity for a different type of a managed services agreement, is in not only meeting those service level agreements, but then finding ways to improve improve whatever the thing is that you're managing ultimately, as part of the engagement as well. So, if it's a support contract, yes, it's really important to make sure that the application remains up and all those things are kind of table stakes. But then what else are you doing in your partnership with the customer to identify where there need to be improvements made, and how can you leverage that team that's already in the system and already participating with the customer to drive some of those things as well. So for me, it's all about how are you creating an engagement that allows the managed services provider to understand ultimately the goals of the business and correlating that to some other services or some other things that they can deliver under that existing agreement.
Perfect. Next question. You've mentioned a number of the benefits of managed services. What are some specific situations in which you think managed services are not the right option?
That's a good question. Yeah, we talked a lot about managed services, and again, I said they weren't a silver bullet. They also may not always be the right thing. I still think that, if you're doing if you have a specific set of functionality that you want to implement, and that has a distinct beginning and end, a project engagement might make a lot more sense, right? At that point in time, you can be much more accountable to a specific set of functionality or a specific set of deliverables. And a lot of times as a customer, you need some of that certainty in order for you to get the budget signed off for, you need a very distinct set of deliverables at the end of that. So, obviously that's going to be one of those cases, whereas managed services requires you to be, it's usually a little bit of a longer term contract. And a lot of times if you're doing it, especially in a place where you're delivering new functionality, the specific deliverables that are going to be created may not be set. In some situations, that's a benefit. In some situations, it's not. Yeah, I guess that would be probably my primary example of where you wouldn't want to use managed services. I guess the other place I'll say that is, if you know that whatever you're looking to accomplish is going to be part of your long-term goal and your long-term capability as an organization, you can and should invest in your own talent and your own teams to do that. And even if you start that off with, using a provider to, as I mentioned, to sort of start things, ultimately it's still in your best interest to build a capability and a capacity to do that yourself. And then again, look for providers to augment or enhance where you don't have the capability or where you're not looking to invest within that capability. Those would be probably my two examples that come to mind off the top of my head.
Perfect. That is the end of the questions that we've got right now, Luke. Great.
Well, thank you, everybody. I do appreciate the questions. I appreciate the participation as it is within the context of these webinars. And I guess I just wanted to say thank you. I appreciate you spending an hour with me this morning. I know webinars are very common in our new and different way of doing business. And I appreciate you spending a little bit of time with me and prioritizing this hour to spend some time with me. And I hope I've added some value. If you do have other questions, or if you do want to, talk about any of these other things in more detail, or go down a rabbit hole about some of this stuff, I'm more than willing to chat. You see my email address here, and I believe you would have my contact information coming out of the webinar. And of course, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, thank you very much. Have a great afternoon, and I really appreciate you spending some time with us.
Perfect. Thanks everybody for joining us. We do have a number of other events coming up. We have a enterprise integration roundtable tomorrow, and we have a number of webinars already scheduled for 2021. Have a great holiday season, and thanks again for joining us.